Welcome, everybody. It's Dr. Doug Pernikoff and my wonderful co-host, Miss Cindy Vickers, and we are here at Dr. Doug's All Things Animal Radio Show. Today, we had a little bit of change of plans, and we're going to be talking generally about conservation and aspects of conservation, and hopefully I'll be able to include some of the stories of my own involvement that are interesting and fun. So I'm going to let Cindy kind of manage me today.
Yeah.
And
oh, boy.
I've already been lectured to just a few minutes ago, but I can't talk about that on the radio. But anyway, so I guess I'll just start, though, Cindy, with a simple kind of concept definition. You know, conservation is not only so important to ourselves as individuals, but as our human community, because we talk about conserving what little forests we have, what little wild spaces, and we just don't realize, I think, the average person doesn't realize how much we depend on the resources that have made our lives comfortable. I mean, if you look around in your home or in your room, everything that we have that's tangible that we can touch, furniture or whatever, electronics, those materials come somewhere at some point from the wild space, either directly or indirectly. And I think we just forget that as we decimate those wild spaces, we are really making ourselves vulnerable to a more difficult lifestyle. And I always wonder about our grandkids and our great-grandkids and what kind of life are they going to be living in. And, you know, these forests, we know, the trees and the plant life, they absorb the CO2, which is really critical, carbon dioxide, and that gives us good oxygen to breathe and exchange. And if we get rid of all these wonderful forests, which we're doing rapidly, country by country, continent by continent, then we're going to be in a fix. And then, of course, just feeding the world. I don't know how many billions of people there are, but trying to feed the world is just so difficult, and it's only going to get worse. And yet we have a lot of countries that are just now going through development, industrial development in India, Brazil, China, and they have so many people and so much need for resource, they are just exploiting the rest of the world. China's buying up Africa. Why? Because there's a ton of resource down there. And, you know, we're all in a fix if we don't manage this correctly.
Well, and I just want to point out, you know, what is the obvious. I mean, this radio show is called All Things Animal, and as we just talked about earlier, if there are not resources certainly for humans to live, there are not resources for animals to live in. You know, one thing I read, it wasn't that long ago, is that because of the rainforest being so depleted, like around Costa Rica and those places, when birds migrate, they have places that they stop. And one of the places that they stop is becoming a place where there is no place for them to stop because the trees and all the foliage is being destroyed. And it's such a horrible domino effect. So if they don't have a place to stop in their migration, that drastically interferes with their life. And then maybe we lose that species or species, many, of birds. I mean, that's just one little story. Thing. And that doesn't even include every other animal that lives in that area.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you decimate a whole forest section, let's say you had a plot of, I don't know, thousands of acres of forest, and it's gone. You have no idea what was living in that space and the biodiversity or the variations in life forms that you've just destroyed, both plant and animal.
Well, and you know, some people probably do have a really good idea, the scientists there, of what happens, but I think we've just gotten to the nitty-gritty of the problem. People don't want to look at it. Right. They either don't have the
sophistication.
Sense or sophistication to know to look at it, or they simply don't want to look at it. And I know that I'm sure I am guilty of that also, but I do also, I think, have a pretty heightened awareness. It bothers me a lot. And you can just look at where if you buy furniture, where it is sourced from.
Right.
I'm not going to mention any places, but I stopped shopping at this one store because I knew that their wood came from the rainforest.
Yeah.
And it's not done responsibly. It's not like 4 trees are planted when
it's just exploit.
1,000 are cut down.
I don't know if you've ever flown over a country like Haiti. And Dominican Republic's just contiguous to it, right? So if you fly over Haiti, it's barren because they've exhausted their forest. It's essentially a barren ground. And of course, they have trouble surviving there, right? The population's suffering, this and that. And then anytime they have a storm, it's worse. And then you go just across to Dominican Republic, and it's extremely managed, and you have beautiful forests and all this stuff. But it's really stark reality is what you get.
Okay, so let's talk about you, Douglas Pernikoff. What is your connection to this? I mean, obviously you're a veterinarian, but this is you have a relatively small animal practice now, and I know that you often have exotics, and it's probably the most interesting clinic, at least in this state.
Crazy clinic.
Yes, because you never know what you might find in that. But that is a different world from a lot of the history that you have. So start to talk about the places you've been and why this matters.
Well, when I was born as a little child, I found myself as an adventurer. I always dreamed of exploring, and then I spent most of my youth running through my creeks by myself, and I created my own kind of world. And I had a throne, I remember, on some branches, and I would just look and observe. I didn't know exactly what I was doing, but I knew I had a love for it. And this got into more contact with animals, and then get a little bit older, and you find frogs, and you find tadpoles, snakes, and all of a sudden that was stimulating. And it was something that would kind of give me some sense of uniqueness and a family of 4 boys all about the same age. And, there's always that competitive thing, but they wouldn't approach the woods. They were kind of cautious. And, I would just jump right in, and I was gone for the day. And it's interesting because I have another friend who is one of the, I think, the world's most significant explorers and biologists, conservation biologists. His name's Mike Fay, and if you look in National Geographic and look him up, he is everywhere and has done so much. But he started the same way. His mom would drop him off in the woods along the rivers up in North New Jersey, and he said, I'd just spend the whole day out just exploring, and then my mom would pick me up at a certain point, and I'd come back. And then he went on into the Peace Corps, which a lot of wildlife conservation people do. I did not. I tried to apply to the Peace Corps when I was 15. They said I had no skills for them. I mean, who gets turned down from the Peace Corps? I felt so
Everybody
useless.
at 15.
Probably, yeah. I think there was age thing. I thought, okay, I'll come back when I'm 45 or 50 or whatever, right? Which I didn't go, but I applied, my interest developed, and then I always knew I wanted to be a veterinarian, but I also knew that I wanted to be involved in exotic zoological animals like you find at the zoo or in the wild, and I knew I wanted to have a role in field conservation. So again, you just mature and you go through stages, you get more educated, and your understanding again gets more sophisticated. You understand where you may play a role. So I wanted my veterinary degree, but I also wanted to be able to apply it in a way that was much more impactful than just the day-to-day grind of a small animal practice.
Well, now I'm wondering if this woods thing is somehow significant to people who have a great love of animals. Because if you ask me where would I most like to be, my choices are usually in a yoga class, in a barn, or in the woods. I love the woods, and I do love the beach, and I love the water. I mean, everybody does, but the woods for me is the coolest place. And even the bugs. I mean, sometimes they freak me out, but I'm always fascinated by them and what they do. And the thought of any other animal that is, maybe a mammal would be even cooler. But I absolutely love it. I love the woods. I love the animals, and I wonder if that's a characteristic.
I think what it does is you become empathetic, I guess, and aware of the beauty and the balance. Even if you don't understand all the forms and principles, you just know it feels good. I remember walking out into my woodlands by my house, which I'm right on Rockwood Reservations area, and I walked into a meadow. And so the creek's on one side, the sloping hillsides on the other, and this is a flat land. And it just happened to be a day that had like a lot of morning mist. And, it was just glorious.
You thought you died?
Oh, I really thought that this is what you always see images of heaven. Like, it's just that beautiful. So I get it. And then when I started doing my professional work in conservation, I got to explore these wild spaces. And, there are endless stories I have. But each one was so stimulating. People would say, when you come back, they'd say, wasn't that uncomfortable to be out in the jungle or whatever? And I go, you don't remember all the discomfort as much as you remember the memories of the beauty and the balance and the things that you learned just being and observing.
So what's your, if you could just recount a specific place and something specific that you did or were interested in as it relates to conservation,
well,
where would that be?
Yeah, one of my first actual formal field projects was in Sri Lanka, which used to be called Ceylon. It was a British colonial management for many years, and then I think Portuguese were in there. A number of European countries had been colonials throughout Africa and Asia for many, many thousands or hundreds of years at least. And so what they would do is they would bring in some kind of infrastructure, roads, education systems, stuff like that. And then as a country developed economically, they would tend to push out the colonial and want to take over their own ownership and stuff. But that was sometimes good and sometimes bad. But anyway, I was invited to, through Washington University and another program at Columbia University in New York, they needed someone to manage a field station that Smithsonian had started. So Smithsonian was so amazing. They started years ago before anybody was doing conservation, and they would establish a program wherein they provide the scientists and the money to develop a site, a conservation site, and it might be on the edge of a forest someplace, and in this case it was in Sri Lanka, and we were in the middle of the jungle with little farm communities around us and little city communities around us, but it was pretty much just woodland and farmland. And in this particular case, they had been studying this group of monkeys called toque macaques, and they look like a little rhesus monkey with a little hat that makes a toque, I guess is the term. And they were in this forest free-ranging, and there were over 600, 700 monkeys in this group. And they had been studied visually for over 20-something years. But now they were in a phase where they wanted to know more about what they visualized. They wanted to know the genetic analysis of these individuals, and they could understand how bands of monkeys break apart and come together. They call that fission and fusion, back and forth. All group animals do this. So this way, they could identify, they had three, I was just amazed, they had 3 camp people that were trained as biologists in the camp. The guy who ran the camp was a Smithsonian biologist, an amazing guy. And then the people from New York were amazing. They were geneticists. So
I have to interrupt for a minute
yes.
about the fission and the fusion. When you say that there were like, what, 600-700 monkeys?
Yes.
So you're saying that group would break into like subsets?
Yes, exactly.
And when you like...
They'd break apart, come together, break apart, and there'd be sometimes different individuals.
But why would they break apart? To do what?
It probably has... I'm guessing it has a lot to do with different dominant characters within a specific collection of animals, and also resource management.
Okay, so I'm still on this for a second. So when they're together, I'm guessing that they're like eating and interacting and living in one area, but breaking apart means physically they separate themselves for
yes.
like a mile, or
it may not be even that much
feet.
space. It could be that they even interact as one group to another for a shared feeding space. For instance, let's say some tree has a fruiting material that comes out seasonally. They know in the scope of their territory where to find the goodies. So they might, a big group, let's say a group that had 50 or 60 or 70 animals, might push the other group out, subordinate them, and they'd get the first pick at the food, and then they'd move on to another and another. So it really varied. But and it was interesting that we were able to trap these animals. And the first year before they had me there, they had some local people trying to help them. They only did, I think, in about 4.5 months, they were able to trap something like 60 monkeys. And I think some died because they didn't know how to manage them. They had to anesthetize them all and stuff. And so we went the next year, and I managed it, and I brought 2 students from WashU and the National Zoo, and we captured over 600 monkeys in the same time period without a single death. And we collected biology, we collected materials, blood, milk from lactating females, on and on for 14 different research groups around the world. And we would collect and disperse. So it was just an amazing experience.
And what did that do for conservation, though?
Well, I'll explain when we come back, because we're going to break away here for just a moment. And Cindy will continue to ask me questions. We'll be talking more about conservation. And we'll be back with Dr. Doug's All Things Animal radio show. And Cindy and Dr. Doug will be back to answer that question. Here we are again in our next section. We're going to continue talking about conservation and some of my field stories. And Cindy had just asked me a question again. You want to repeat it for the public?
Well, how does the taking of blood and milk and dispersing this among scientists help with the... What was the point? What are you trying to conserve?
That's a good point. So each research project has a purpose. So the genetics were to understand how to manage, how these animals are managing themselves so that they don't become bottlenecked. Bottleneck is when you have a very limited genetic pool, right? A representation becomes too common and repeated. So if you're inbred, for instance, that's not what you want. So how does the animal that's not conscious, theoretically conscious of his genetic makeup, how is he able to manage himself so he doesn't cause a kind of bottleneck in his own population? And unfortunately, it does happen in some animal vertebrate groups, especially like cheetahs, for instance, only because their space is so big and the numbers are so few that the genetic material becomes almost like one.
But was that always the case, or was it because are the numbers few because they have been...
Because land
their home has been taken away.
Yeah.
So what can happen as a result of
losing
the land? It can get to the point where a species actually gets bottlenecked because they can't live naturally.
Right, and that's one. And a lot of animals, don't forget, migrate long distances. Like elephants travel thousands of miles every year along the territorial lines that are evolutionarily stated, right? And then we cut off areas that they would normally migrate through, and suddenly they're disrupting, they're going into the human space and stealing food from the agricultural sites and stuff. They become a problem because we've distorted their normal habits.
Because we have to have all the space because we have no control.
Right. And now these other studies, part of it is also to understand from a pure scientific purpose, what's the well-being of this group? And that was my particular graduate study at WashU, was to understand how groups like this had been studied for so many years. Now we were getting biological materials that we could study their biochemistries, their physiology. We could do measurements, which we did, so we could understand more about their growth patterns and whatever. And the whole idea is that the more you learn about a population, then you can help to manage it better and in a way that protects the population than anything underneath the population. We call those keynote species, the bigger vertebrates that everybody sees and knows. They're the ones that you're going to recognize and be more likely to want to support, like an elephant or a gorilla we all love. But then in the forest, there are so many other diverse species, right? From insect on up. And if we're protecting the forest because we are focusing on protecting and understanding one species, we are inadvertently and hopefully protecting many other species. So as a general rule, it's a good management tool to know as much as you can about any given population, and that's what we were trying to do. So we were instituting a lot of those studies. So we studied parasites, loads in the animals, and when does this become a problem, or when is it okay to have a parasite load, and all this gets thrown back to the scientists to discuss, and becomes a part of what our scientific world is about. And the more we do this for these threatened species and threatened areas, then the more we know and the more we can impart information to the local people to get them involved and say, look, this is really an important resource for you, either because now we can do ecotourism, which generates income for you and your country, and we do it smartly and in a way that's responsible to protect the animals and not and encourage other problems like mountain gorillas. We always worry about tourists going in and bringing human diseases because the animals are so close in genetic to the humans that they can transfer diseases they might be carrying back to the primates. And you have an endangered group of mountain gorillas. They have picked up diseases from humans that have come through to tour. So, I mean, one action potentially creates another problem or another set of circumstances you have to address. There's no single action that sits by itself. Everything is, it's like your body. One disease doesn't affect typically just one organ. Usually it affects multiple organs, and the interactions of those organ responses are important for a doctor to understand to treat you. It's the same idea if you look at a population in a particular eco-niche. It's the same kind of interrelatedness that's really important to recognize.
Well, this is such an enormous problem, and I think that our environment is such an enormous problem that is something that is not a task that we can ignore. However, trying to convince somebody who doesn't want to buy into the importance of it is a really, if not difficult, if not an impossible chore.
As we see, our government is fighting over these things now with, leaving the Paris Accord. How does that impact what's going to happen? Or encouraging coal industry to come back, which is such a detriment to our environment. I mean, it's always a challenge. And unfortunately, money is what drives the game.
Well, and I think, I'm going to go back to the thing I said about people just closing their eyes about what they don't want to see. I think we do that for everything. We don't want to talk about something like child abuse or spousal abuse because we don't want to think about it because it seems right. It's very uncomfortable. It seems horrible to us, and we don't want it to happen. But we don't want to do anything about it because then we have to look at it, and that's what we don't want to do. And people, I think, feel helpless and they don't know what to do, and then they get caught up in their busy life. But this is way past the point of affecting all of us and our world that we live in. And, I think that, I kind of like data about things. I'd love to know if there's anything that we can do that actually makes, as I drink out of, which I swore I was not going to do, this is it. You hear it right now on the radio. I'll never drink out of this plastic water bottle again. It's one of the bigger problems in terms of biodegradable.
Non-biodegradable.
I mean, yes, non-biodegradable products that we particularly throw in the ocean or that float up and down on, the barges in the Atlantic Ocean.
Well, the northern, and I think it's around the Bering Strait, up the northwest oceans, have a floating, like a flotilla of plastic and trash that's as large as the state of Texas. And it's just floating up there. And
also in the Pacific.
Right. And whoever knew? I mean, I think I meant the Pacific. I'm sorry. And, but, I mean, I got an impression of this the first time when we had the plane that was lost out of the Southeast Asia, and the Australians, we were all looking for it, never found that plane. And what they were finding every time they thought they had particles of the plane, it turned out it was trash. And it was the first time I was naive to think that, conservation is only important in the land masses, and that the ocean's so big, how in the world could we really impact that? Well, we have. We've overfished the areas. We've destroyed with pollutants that run into the rivers, that run into the oceans. We're just an irresponsible people. And one of my professors one time told me that if humans lived to be 200 years instead of 100, we would be a lot more responsible to our space because we had to live in it. But since humans are kind of short-sighted and tend to be a bit greedy in that sense, and they're not responsible to the next generations like they should be. Everybody's looking for the quick fix and the quick opportunity. Like when I traveled around Southeast Asia, I was in 1 2-day visit. I remember we were in Sumatra, and we were driving from coast to coast, looking for monkeys and doing research. And what we saw was we would see areas of natural forest that were just cut away. So there's a process. When they cut the forest, the wood gets sold. The local people move into the area and they encircle this mass of land, and they go in, and those are called the charcoal burners, and they go in and they burn wood remnant and they make charcoal and they sell that. So now the land is gone, right? Then the oil palm or the coconut palm industry comes in and they build forest to harvest, right? But now these are monotypic, right? One type of tree for 1,000 acres, where it used to be a forest full of so much biodiversity. It was amazing. Now, certain animal species are adaptable and they'll make things happen, but so many are not. And now you've got this community encircling this area, and this is how these communities grow. And we saw literally 2 days driving of endless decimation of forest. And I'm not a tree hugger kind of guy, but I was depressed. I just got so depressed.
I read the labels. I don't buy anything that has palm oil in it.
Yeah. I mean, it's a terrible industry.
It's a very simple thing to do also.
Yeah.
Just that one thing. I mean, people can make all the difference to make things better as well by, educating yourself a little. It's not hard. You can read a non-fake
right.
news even on Facebook, and just talk about plastic or just about palm oil or
right.
Something very brief that would make you go, this is
so
really
humans
terrible for us.
We created these great polymers, and it's really kind of impressive what they did, but the reality is it's so damaging, like you said, and it's there for such a long time.
And oddly enough, this is sort of remotely related. Obesity is such a huge problem in our country, and people
don't look at me when you say that.
Well, it's and then it's everywhere, and it's been for as long as I can remember my entire life. It's always been a huge deal about losing weight and this exercise and this diet. I don't remember a time where it hasn't been obnoxiously important, and it seems it's just that because we have created all those things that are hurting us, that if we, if we just ate differently, like if people grew some food in their garden and ate that, it would give them some physical exercise, it would give them good food. It would sort of just retrain your thinking, but we don't want to bother to do that.
Well,
because now that's work.
Right. We can go to the grocery store.
But not doing the work is creating something that we hate.
I get it.
It's just...
Well, we're going to break in just a moment and come back, and this is fun. I hope everybody's enjoying the topic. Again, thank you, Cindy, for managing me today. And Dr. Doug and Cindy Vickers will be back from Dr. Doug's All Things Animal radio show, and we'll be back in just a moment and continue our discussion.
In a world full of wonder, lying there under the sea.
Welcome back again. We're here in our third segment of Dr. Doug's All Things Animal radio show, and Cindy Vickers and myself are talking about conservation in general terms, and we're also talking about some of the stories of my own experience, which are so much fun to remember. And, people have possessions. My possessions are my memories, and that's something nobody can take away from you, maybe God.
Well, I was going to say, well, hopefully.
But at least I own them until he takes them.
Well, I've got a question.
Sure.
I want to know about these, something about blow darts.
Oh, okay.
Your blow dart invention or your blow dart project.
So I had this one project where the...
it's out of a Tarzan movie.
It sounds great. I was working as a zoo vet at the Fort Worth Zoo, and I had an invitation to go to Southeast Asia and dart monkeys in southern Malaysia. And we were darting them to collect biopsy samples so we can do a genetic analysis of this group of monkeys. They were called leaf monkeys or langurs. Beautiful big monkeys. And they're tree-born. And anyway, so...
They're tree-born.
They live in the trees, and they're mostly tree-oriented. They're arboreal.
Okay. They're not necessarily born in the tree.
Well, they probably are in most cases anyway.
Really?
But tree-born mean they're inclined to be in the trees rather than a ground-dwelling critter. So the biologist needed some help in trying to figure out how to get those samples. So I was thinking, okay, how do I do this? So I had just seen Ghostbusters. And remember the packs they made? I swear to God, this was my stimulus. So I decided, okay, I'm going to take and make my pack. And back then, we only had VCRs. They had those big VCR batteries. So I got a battery from a VCR. I went to the hardware store and got one of those little $20 air pumps you can get for your tires. And I had someone hook this up with me, and we hooked it to a CO2 cartridge so that I could take a blow dart, which was used in the zoo world, where you charge a dart with something, and like fluid, and you can anesthetize them. In this case, we only wanted it as a projectile to deliver the dart to get a biopsy sample. So I took a Dremel drill, and I dremeled off my needles, and then I took and made them sharp but flat, so they weren't like a needle, but they were more like a plug. And then I took dental burrs from the dentist and put those in. They used those to clean between the teeth, and that was a metal kind of almost like I don't know how to describe it, like a spring would be, but we'd put it inside the core of the needle.
I need to just say that I know you can't see me because it's radio, but I have a horrified look on my face, but please carry on.
Okay, so I had the needle, and that was going to collect the material. The geneticist...
And then you're going to like pull it back in, like reel it back in?
Well,
like
I'm going to tell you that part of it,
Oh,
but
God, okay.
And then the geneticist had material called fast blood. So what that would do is it would take a biological sample and leave it at ambient or temperature, and we could put tissue in there. It would preserve the DNA, so we didn't have to freeze it like they used to do, and we could have it for 30 days safe while we were in the jungle working. So this was like a miracle opportunity, right? So we went to an area in Malaysia where these animals were concentrated, and I put this dart system together, and I had it on my shoulders like a backpack, and I had the blowpipe people make a 2-meter collapsible tube that was rifled. So if you know what that means, on the inside of the thing, it's cored so you have a perfect delivery, like a bullet.
Shot yourself.
No, I shot the monkeys, and I would shoot them in the thigh as they were sitting there way up in the tree.
You had that good of an aim? Is that what you're
I did.
saying?
I put a sight on it too, by the way. I had this device, and when I broke it down, it didn't look like anything. It didn't look like a gun or anything, because you couldn't get into these countries with anything that looked like a gun. But it would look like some kind of toolkit. And when I put it together, I had this device that was accurate for up to 30 meters, which
I think
is
you
90
should not
feet.
have even said this on the air. I think you're getting people who ideas of how to do bad things.
Oh, no, this was important. Now they sell the product, my dart, through these darting things, but, I wasn't smart enough at that time in my life to commercialize it myself, but now it exists. So anyway, we would go in the forest, I'd see these animals, and then one afternoon I had successfully collected 19 samples. So when the dart hits the animal's thigh, it torques because it's going in it's moving in kind of a spiral, and then it hits the tissue and it torques out a sample, and then the monkeys don't feel anything but like a mosquito bite, and they just scratch it out and it falls to the ground, and then we have to go find it. So the biggest conflict was there were some cases where we had really dense forest and I couldn't find the dart afterwards, on a rare occasion. So when I came back, my next job was to try and figure out how to put a telemetry device inside the syringe so we could track it.
A what device?
Telemetry is when you have electronic tracking devices you've heard about, so they can put it on, sometimes they put them on whales or stuff.
Oh, they have
like
the
that.
whole big thing about now how you can keep track of your kids if they hit the water, and it's on the Today Show, but it was
Hopefully they're
better
not
story.
they're not implanting anything, but it's possible.
When it might hurt more than a mosquito bite. You're just assuming.
No,
Just saying.
this was real. I mean, they would just sit there. They wouldn't even jump. They wouldn't move. They just do a little
Oh.
shake and knock it out, because it really didn't hurt that much. And again, these are wild animals that used to get banged up in the wild. So anyway, we collected 19 samples successfully, and a lady got her PhD work from the tissue that we gave them. And then we happened on that same trip, we went from Sumatra to Bali, and they had the International Primatological Society meeting. So we were invited to train primate biologists. I took them out in Bali where there was primate groups, and we showed them how to use the device. And it was great. It was a lot of fun. And you feel like you're providing some kind of impactful value to the world.
Or you felt like kind of like Indiana Jones. is what
I
I'm
was
thinking,
Indiana
really.
Jones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that was the bigger adventure right there.
Well, the snakes wouldn't
Did you have a
bother me.
hat?
I did. I had a whole outfit. I'll have to show it to you sometime. I shaved my head.
You did?
My beard, I mean, really short, and then I grew my beard out, and I looked like a crazy man. And I remember when I came.
How about
anyway, when I came back from the Sri Lanka trip, my kids were just babies, and I remember I come back looking like this crazy guy, and I'm all dark, suntan, and everything, and my littlest son was like 18 months old, and he's hiding behind my wife, holding onto her legs, looking like, who is that?
Yeah.
So anyway, but then they got to hear all the neat stories and adventures.
So the question is, given the opportunity, would you go again on one of these adventures?
Yeah, my good friend I mentioned earlier from National Geo, Mike Fay, and I talked about this because we were both interested in the same things. And he said, look, unfortunately, you have a young family, and, I don't have a family, so I can go do the things I'm going to do, and you're going to have a harder time making it work. So I did it for several years, and it was difficult because I would be gone anytime from 4.5 months down to, most of the trips were like 6 to 8 weeks. And that's a lot of time. One year I was gone at least 6 months of the year, and it's hard when you have 3 kids at home and your wife's trying to manage all that. But she was happy for me to go, and for probably a lot of reasons, get out of here. But, she knew that if I wasn't happy, that we wouldn't be happy. And this was something I was driven to do. So, lots of other stories we can share. I've done work with elephants in the wild. I've done work with, one interesting story was the Jamaican iguana was the rarest reptile in the world at one time. And they had a small population, estimated to be 24 animals left ever, anywhere. So they considered it extremely rare, right? So it was in an area in, I believe that was southeast Jamaica. It was called the Hellshire Hills, and it was a trek up the hill. And I had to trek up, and it was after a party night there, and they got me a little bit inebriated on rum, on Jamaican rum. And the next morning I had to trek 3 hours up this mountain with a full backpack. I was dying. But the interesting thing was, people had introduced vermin to control vermin. And this is another mistake that humans do. It's happened in other countries. And then, for instance, they introduced, not the mink, but I'm losing my mind, the other small species that's so aggressive. But anyway, they went up and killed all the birds, and they populated well in the Hellshire Hills, and it's all kind of limestone rocky with lots of cavities and stuff, so it was easy to hide. But again, they had rediscovered this particular species of iguana, and so we knew where. We went with the biologists who found them, and the only way you could find them was during breeding season, nesting season, because that's when the females would come into these little areas of red soil that you could find throughout the forest, and they would burrow and they would lay their eggs, and then they would sit there for a week or so and protect their nests so that predators couldn't get to them. So the biologists would protect that area after they left, the mothers left, and then they'd harvest the babies. And we actually had a very successful story. We brought the babies back into the zoo and were able to repopulate. So all the zoos that were able to get these babies, they put animals back in the wild, and it was one of those really tremendously successful conservation stories.
Are they still considered extremely rare then?
They're probably considered rare. I don't know what the basic status is right now, but in the zoo world, they're prevalent because we harvested so many babies successfully. And I went up in the mountains, and we had to collect them for blood samples for genetic analysis. So I was bleeding these guys, but I have pictures, I think, of me hiding in the woodland and outside these sites and just camouflage and taking pictures and all kinds of stuff. It was just a trip. But yeah, that was an amazing adventure, and just to be out in these wild spaces that are really pretty much untouched, and that was the greatest advantage.
So I'm gonna say an uncomfortable question. Wouldn't you want to know if, first of all, taking these eggs, these babies from the mother, that hits like a nerve with me, but
well, you're not taking them from the mother. The mother leaves them and disappears.
Oh, she does?
Yeah, she doesn't nurse them. These are reptiles. They're ready.
She just protects the eggs for a while so they have a chance of survival, and then she leaves. Okay, I feel better.
Yeah.
All right.
And the point is that if they hadn't done these programs, there wouldn't be any Jamaican iguanas left. They literally only had 2 dozen left in the wild was the estimate ever. So anyway, we're going to take another break real quickly. And this is Dr. Doug Pernikoff and Miss Cindy Vickers, and we will be back to discuss, I guess, is it
Events.
recap time? Events,
Well,
activities.
quite a few.
But anyway, thanks for listening, folks. Dr. Doug's All Things Animal radio show. We'll be back in just a second.
Mr. Trouble never hangs around when he hears this mighty sound. Here I come to save the day. That means that Mighty Mouse is on the way.
Okay, gang, we're back for a little recap session, and it was fun for me talking about my conservation adventures in the field. I have many, many other stories. Hopefully one day we'll get them on a blog so people can hear them or read them and enjoy them. But it's great. I mean, I just want to say we have a big responsibility as a human community to recognize the importance and value of the remaining wild spaces. And it's not just tropical forest. Our deserts have specific value. All the water systems have specific value. And if we don't take responsibility for these things now, then we're going to be sorry. And if it's not us, it'll be our legacy, our children and our grandchildren and beyond. They're going to be living in much more compromised settings, less comfortable than what we grew up in. So I wish and hope that everybody will be more responsible, and you can always approach me at my clinic at 636-530-1808, the Clarkson Wilson Veterinary Clinic. If you want to learn more, you can talk to me there. And Cindy's always available for wonderful training programs. You can call her at 636-530-1808 as well, and we can connect you with her, and she'll be happy to help you. So, Cindy, I think you said you had some events to share.
I do. I'm going to go through these rather quickly because there's just a variety of things, and I'll just touch on a little bit in July because there's so much happening in July. But for June, on the 15th, if you're thinking about something interesting, maybe for Father's Day, they're doing caricatures, and I'm assuming that there is a caricature of your dog. Uh-huh. And if Dad is really crazy about the dog or the cat or whatever the animal is, they'll do a caricature of them. It's at the Bentley's Pet Stuff in Creve Coeur from 6 to 7 p.m., but you can drop off a picture.
Where is that again?
Bentley's Pet Stuff in Creve Coeur.
Oh,
There's
okay.
more than one Bentley's,
okay.
But this is the one in Creve Coeur. On June 11th, they're at the Petco in Graveway Bluffs. The St. Louis Pet Rescue is adoption, which means they'll have probably some really wonderful animals that are looking for a forever home. So that's at the 11th, and also on the 17th. It was on the 10th as well today. But also next week, the 17th, they will also be at the Petco in Graveway Bluffs at 11 o'clock, and then they will be at the PetSmart in Sunset Hills at 12 o'clock. So
Same group.
Yeah, but probably different animals. I'm sure they're not.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. And then just looking forward to July a little bit. This is now, but the next event is July 3rd. The Boathouse in Forest Park has a yappy hour every first Wednesday of the month. It's from 4 to 7 p.m. It costs $5. So if you are not somebody who goes to Forest Park and the Boathouse, it is such a wonderful place to be.
It's a fun place.
It's a great place, and you can sit outside and sit on the water, and you can bring your dog the first Wednesday of every month for $5. On the July 13th, there's something called Dog Dining at the Three Dog Bakery. Mm-hmm. That costs $20 per dog, and you can order your own food, but they're doing like this whole sort of like your dog's going out to a restaurant, but it's a fundraiser for their Three Dog Foundation, and that goes to help abused and neglected dogs. And then finally, July 18th, they also have Yappy Hour at Larimar Park. That is a free event, but they've got all kinds of booths and games and things. It's specifically set up so that you can go with your dog and kind of socialize with people and other pets and have fun things for the dog. So that's July 18th. So, think about it and get out. Yeah,
events.
Places where you can bring your dog.
Yeah, we'll remind you again of some of those events that are further in the future when we come back each week. Next week, we're still excited about a possible special guest. If it's not next week, it'll be the week after, but we'll
Probably
have a wonderful topic for you, and it's always fun to surprise you with the goodies that we do. And again, I just want to thank everybody for listening. And Cindy, again, thanks for hosting me this time. And we'll hopefully be back and see you all next week. So, see you later, Dr. Doug's All Things Animal Radio Show.
Save the day. That means that Mighty Mouse is on the way.